No one told the Highland Duke she was still alive, until the night she walked out of the dark. A Duke's Choice story, engine F-5, 550 words, 30-minute listen. My brother never spoke of her. That was how I knew she had destroyed him. I am Callum Aldrich Vane, younger brother to Edmund Vane, the Duke of Stormville, and I will tell you what I witnessed across 7 years. What I watched a proud, relentless man become when the world took from him the one person he had no right to love and every reason to. Her name was Isara Whitfield. She was nobody by the reckoning of our society. The ward of a minor baron, half English, half unknown, raised at the edge of a crumbling estate in the northern hills where the wind came off the moor like a blade. She had no title, no portion, no name worth trading at a dinner table. She had dark eyes that held a question in them always, and a way of standing very still in a room full of noise that made you notice her before you understood why. Edmund noticed her the winter she was 17. He was 24, already the Duke of Stormville in full, already feared across 3 counties for his temper and his silence, and the way he looked at men who displeased him. He had ridden up to Whitfield Manor on a state business. The Baron owed him a surveying debt, and she had been the one to answer the door, because the Baron's household ran on fraying thread and rotted ambition, and there was no one else. I was not there for that first meeting. I heard it from Edmund himself, years later, when he had drunk enough to tell the truth. He said she had looked at him without flinching. Every person of rank Edmund had met since inheriting the dukedom flinched, some in fear, some in flattery, some in that particular way the well-born flinch when they are performing their own courage. Isara Whitfield had simply looked at him, assessed him the way a woman assesses a problem she does not yet know how to solve, and said, "You'll want to speak with my guardian then. He's in the East Wing, sleeping off last night's port. I'd give him an hour." Edmund had waited an hour. He had done it, he told me, because he found he did not want to leave. That was the beginning. What followed I will not dress up as a courtship, because it was not. Edmund was a duke. She was a baron's ward with nothing to her name. Society would not have called it a courtship. Society would have called it a condescension at best and a scandal at worst. And our mother, God rest her opinionated soul, called it an embarrassment when she heard the whispers, and told Edmund in no uncertain terms that Stormville did not ally itself with girls plucked from drafty manors on the edge of nowhere. Edmund did not argue with our mother. He rarely argued. He simply continued. He rode to Whitfield Manor on the pretense of estate business through 2 winters. He corresponded with the Baron on surveying matters that required no correspondence. He was not, I think, fully aware himself of what he was doing, or rather he was aware but unwilling to name it, because naming it would have forced a decision, and Edmund had always moved best when he moved in silence. Isara, for her part, was not innocent of what was happening. She was not the kind of woman who missed things. She had grown up in a household that ran on neglect and careful watching, and she had learned to read rooms, read faces, read the weight a man put on a particular word. She knew what Edmund's visits meant. She knew, too, what they could not mean, what society would say, what her guardian would say, what she herself would say if she were sensible and practical and not, as it happened, already in love with him by the time she thought to arm herself against it. She told him so one afternoon in early spring, when the moor was half thawed and a cold rain was coming in off the hills. I know this because she told me herself much later. She said, "I know what I am to you. I know what I cannot be. I'm telling you now so we can both stop pretending otherwise and you can stop riding 40 miles in the wrong weather for a woman you cannot keep." Edmund had said nothing for a long time. Then he had said, "I know what you are, I am still here." And that was the problem, and that was also everything. The Baron died in November of that year. I do not mourn Baron Whitfield. He was a man of small cruelties and large debts, who had spent 30 years making a ruin of everything placed in his care, including one dark-eyed ward who had no one else in the world to speak for her. When he died, his creditors arrived within the week, and his estate, such as it was, went with them. Isara Whitfield had no legal claim to anything. She was a ward of a dead man with no provision made, no funds set aside, no family to receive her. By law she was simply free, which is to say, by law she was simply alone. Edmund rode north the same day he received word. He was too late. This is the fact I have lived with for 7 years, and I set it down here plainly because I think it deserves plainness. My brother rode 40 miles through November mud to reach Whitfield Manor, and she was gone. The creditors had come. A letter had come before them, the contents of which we would not learn for years, and Isara had left with nothing but what she could carry, and no forwarding address, and no word to anyone that told us where. There was a woman in the village who had been kind to her, Mrs. Crane, a blacksmith's widow. Edmund rode to her that same evening. Mrs. Crane said that Isara had been frightened, that she had received a letter 2 days before the creditors arrived, and that after reading it she had gone very pale and very quiet, and she had said, "Tell no one I was here. Tell no one where I've gone. Tell the Duke of Stormville if he comes that I am sorry." That was all she left him, "I am sorry." Edmund came home that night and he sat in his study for a long time, and in the morning he was exactly the man he had always been, except that he was not quite, not to anyone who knew how to look. He searched for her. I want to be clear about this. He did not accept the loss and move on the way a sensible man of his rank might have done, the way our mother begged him to do, the way 3 separate solicitors advised. He searched. He sent inquiries north, south, east, to every coaching inn, every registry office, every charitable institution that received women of no means. He spent more money on the search than the original surveying debt that had brought him to Whitfield Manor in the first place. He found nothing. 6 months in, a rumor reached him through a solicitor's network. A woman matching her description had died of a fever at a coaching inn in the West Country. Edmund rode there himself. The woman was not Isara. He came home without saying so, and no one asked, and he sat with that uncertainty for a year before a second inquiry established beyond doubt that the dead woman had been someone else entirely. He did not know if Isara was alive. He behaved in all outward matters as though life continued. He managed his estates. He attended Parliament when duty required. He was cold and capable and feared, and exactly the Duke of Stormville the world expected. He refused 3 introductions in 2 years, each time with a brevity that discouraged further effort. Our mother gave up suggesting matches when she realized that the brevity was not arrogance but something else, something she did not have a word for in her vocabulary of social ambitions. I watched him every year, and every year he was the same. And every year the sameness cost him something I could not name but could see in the particular stillness of him at dinner, in the way he occasionally stopped reading a letter and sat for a moment with his hand flat on the table, in the look he got sometimes when someone said a woman's name that began with the same sound as hers. He did not speak of her. I did not ask. 7 years. 7 years, and then a letter came. I was at Stormville for the autumn when it arrived. Edmund was out riding the Northfield, and I took the letters in from the post, and among the estate correspondence and the parliamentary notices there was a single envelope, sealed in plain wax, the handwriting on the outside small and careful and immediately, impossibly, familiar, because I had seen it once years ago, on a note she had left for a servant that Edmund had kept in his coat pocket until the paper wore soft at the folds. I did not open it. I carried it out to the Northfield and I put it in Edmund's hand, and I watched his face when he saw the writing. He dismounted. He read it there, standing in the mud of the Northfield with the autumn coming in off the moor, and I watched him read it, and I watched his expression do something I had not seen it do in 7 years, which was simply break open. He did not say anything to me for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "She's alive. She's been alive. She's at a charitable house in Allerwick. He stopped. He said she thought the letter was a threat. She thought if she stayed near me, they would use her against me. She went to keep me safe." He looked up at me then, and there was something in his face that was not quite pain and not quite relief, and was perhaps the exact place where those 2 things live when they arrive together. She kept herself hidden for 7 years, he said, to keep me safe. I said nothing because there was nothing equal to it. Edmund put the letter in his coat. He went back to the house. He called for his horse to be resaddled for a long ride. "Don't," I said. He looked at me. "Let me come with you," I said. "You should not have a witness you don't trust for what happens next." He considered this for a moment. Then he said, "Then come." Allerwick was 3 hours north, deep into the hills where the moor ran wide and gray, and the stone walls of the charitable house rose against the sky like something built for permanence, for endurance, for women who had learned to make a life in difficult ground. We arrived near dark, when the lamps were being lit along the corridor windows, and the smell of wood smoke came down from the chimneys in long gray threads. The woman who met us at the door was practical and unhurried, the kind of woman who had seen enough of the world to be unsurprised by a duke arriving at her door at dusk, and she said she would send for Miss Whitfield, and did we want to wait in the parlor? Edmund said yes. We waited. I cannot tell you what those 15 minutes were for him. I was there and I still cannot tell you. He stood at the window with his back to the room, looking out at the moor going dark, and he was very still, and I understood that the stillness was not composure but its opposite, that he was holding himself in the way a person holds themselves when they are afraid to move because movement might break something they cannot afford to have break. The door opened. She came in quietly. She was 7 years older, we all were, and the 7 years had not been easy years, that was plain enough. She was thinner, and there was a gravity about her that had not been there before, a gravity earned rather than assumed. But she stood the way she had always stood, with that particular quality of stillness and attention, and her dark eyes found Edmund's across the room with the directness I remembered, and she said his name. Not your grace, not the formal address, his name. Edmund turned from the window. I will carry the look on his face to my grave. I have no words adequate to it, and I will not attempt to find them. I will only say that 7 years of silence broke at once, cleanly, the way a long frost breaks in the first real warmth, not gradually but all at once, the whole surface giving way together. He crossed the room in 3 steps. He did not speak. He took her face in his hands with a care that was almost unbearable to watch, and he looked at her, really looked, the way a man looks when he has spent 7 years trying to remember a face accurately, and is now discovering that memory, however faithful, is not the same as the living thing. And she looked back at him with those dark eyes full of something I did not have the right to name. Then he said very low, I searched for you. She said, I know, I heard. I was afraid the searching would put you in danger. He said, nothing puts me in danger except losing you. I need you to know that. I need you to know it now, so you never make a decision of that kind again without knowing it. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, you cannot. I can, he said. I am a duke. I can do almost anything I choose, and what I choose, what I have chosen for 7 years, in every decision I have made, is you. If you will have me, if you will come home. The word home undid her. I saw it, the slight movement in her face, the way she had held herself composed for so long and now found she had no reason to, and it was the word home that was the key, because I do not think Sarah Whitfield had had a home since the Baron's estate had crumbled under her feet, and the idea of it, the simple idea of belonging somewhere to someone, with her own name spoken without apology, was more than all the rest of it put together. She said, yes. Just that, just yes. I will tell you the rest briefly, because it belongs to them rather than to me. Edmund did not bring her back as a secret or a scandal or a problem to be managed. He brought her back as what she was, the woman he had chosen 7 years ago and every year since, the woman who had kept herself hidden in a moorland charitable house rather than risk harm to a man she loved. He made no apology to society for the gap in the story. He made no explanation that invited debate. He brought her home to Stormville in November, the same month she had disappeared, and he introduced her in his own house before his own people with his hand in hers and his voice entirely steady, and he said, This is Sarah Whitfield. She is to be my Duchess. I suggest you find her worthy of your warmest welcome. There was a dinner, because there is always a dinner. There were people at that dinner who had known Edmund for 20 years, who had speculated about the succession, who had proposed their own daughters and their neighbors' daughters, and had never once imagined a ward of a dead baron from a northern estate they had never heard of. Some of them smiled with the practiced warmth of people adjusting to a new reality. Some of them were too surprised to smile at all. Sarah sat at Edmund's right hand, and she was entirely herself, direct and quiet and possessed of that quality of attention that had always made a room notice her before it understood why. And she looked at no one with apology and at no one with defiance, because she had not come to justify herself to this room. She had come because Edmund had asked her to come home, and she had said yes, and the rest was simply the world catching up to something that had been true for 7 years. Our mother, to her credit, said very little. She watched Sarah across the table for the length of the first course with the expression of a woman recalibrating, and at some point between the fish and the roast she said, to no one in particular, she does not flinch. She did not, she never had. Edmund, seated beside her, heard it. I saw him hear it. He looked at our mother for a moment, and then he looked at Isara, and something in his face settled the last remaining tension in him, the last thing he had been carrying, and was simply gone. They were married in the spring, in the small chapel on the Stormville estate, the one on the hill above the north field where Edmund had stood that autumn with the letter in his hand and broken open. It was a quiet ceremony. There were not many witnesses, myself, a few estate people, a woman from Alderwick who had been kind to Isara in the hard years. The trees along the chapel path were in early leaf, pale green against the gray of the northern sky, and the light coming through the chapel windows fell across them both in the particular way it falls in that high northern country, clean and without sentiment. Edmund said his vows in the low, steady voice he uses when he means something entirely, and will not be theatrical about it. Isara said hers with her eyes on his face, and a steadiness that had taken 7 difficult years to build and was now simply hers, permanent, a quality of the woman she had become. He slid the ring on her finger with a care that reminded me, absurdly, of the way he had taken her face in his hands in that Alderwick parlor, with the same quality of attention, the same gravity, the same sense of a man who understands the weight of what he holds. Outside, afterward, the moor was wide and pale, and the wind came off it cold and clean, and Edmund and Isara stood together at the edge of the chapel path with the morning light on them, and they were simply there. No performance, no audience to play to, no one left to justify themselves to. Just the moor and the wind, and 7 years finally over. I stood a little apart, and I watched my brother hold his wife's hand in the cold morning air, and I thought of a girl who had stood very still at a crumbling manor door and looked at a duke without flinching, and of a man who had ridden 40 miles in November mud and arrived too late, and of 7 years that might have broken anyone less stubborn, and I thought, this is what love looks like when it is not a feeling but a decision, made once and then held to, no matter what the world does in between. The world had done considerable. They had held. I will not claim to have been unmoved.